today. We are about midway through what I hope is an entertaining and enlightening series inspired by Marvel's epic movie, Avengers Endgame. For the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about this movie, and social media, the news, everyday conversations were all filled with discussions of Avengers Endgame even before the movie was released. And as soon as the movie came out, fans went absolutely crazy. I've never seen social media talk about one single topic quite so much. For weeks, theaters were sold out, and moviegoers just raved about how good the movie was. And after the biggest opening weekend ever, Endgame eventually went on to become the highest grossing movie ever. And needless to say, Marvel's superhero epic has made an indelible mark on popular culture. And for that reason, I think Endgame is worth viewing through the lens of faith. For the last couple of weeks, I've deconstructed some of the characters and story arcs from Avengers Endgame. Last week, I focused on one Avenger in particular, Thor, who wrestles with failure all throughout the movie. But much like the Apostle Peter, Thor discovers that even though failure is part of life, failure is also forgivable. It doesn't have to define us or disqualify us. And failure is also forgettable, and we can put our failures behind us and press on to what lies ahead. And I also mentioned last week that Thor wields a special weapon, Mjolnir, this mythical hammer that he can use. It responds to his call and channels lightning. And this hammer, if you remember me mentioning, his father placed an enchantment on it, saying, "Whosoever holds this hammer, if he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor." And thanks to this magical spell, no one is able to lift Mjolnir unless they are worthy of wielding it. In fact, there's a scene in one of the previous Avengers films, Age of Ultron, where each of the Avengers, they're just gathered around, spending time with each other, and they each take turns trying to lift Thor's hammer. Hawkeye is the first one to attempt, and he can't budge it, and he claims that it's a trick of some kind. And then, Bruce Banner gives it a shot, but even as the Hulk, he's not capable of lifting this hammer. And then Tony Stark steps up. He even puts on his Iron Man suit, but even with jet propulsion, he doesn't have enough thrust to get the hammer off the ground. And he claims that it's rigged, that the hammer's somehow keyed to Thor's DNA or his fingerprints or something. And Thor responds to that saying, "That's a very interesting theory. I have a simpler one. You're all not worthy." And one Avenger in particular challenges Thor's theory. When Steve Rogers, better known as Captain America, wraps his hand around Mjolnir's handle, the hammer shifts ever so slightly on the table. And Thor raises a surprised eyebrow, but then Steve just suddenly lets go and humbly tosses his hands in the air as if to say, "Oh, I give up, I can't lift it either." And that scene subtly foreshadows the most cheer-worthy moment in Avengers Endgame. In the climactic final battle between the Avengers and Thanos, Thor wields both weapons, Mjolnir and also Stormbreaker, the new hammer that he forged in Infinity War. But even armed with this new powerful weapon, Thor alone just isn't a match for Thanos. And that's when Captain America proves his worth. Let's watch a brief clip from this battle together. I'd let it keep going, but I don't want to give away the entire movie. Audience just erupted watching Captain America wield Mjolnir. In fact, I literally pumped my fist and cheered out loud the first time I saw it. It was just one of those exciting stand up and cheer moments. But it also raises questions about what it means to be worthy. And that question is important not only for Captain America, but also for Christians. In the New Testament book of Philippians, the Apostle Paul writes this. It's Philippians chapter 1, verse 27. He says, just one thing. Live your life in a manner worthy of the gospel of Jesus. Other translations begin this verse with phrases like, whatever happens, or above all else. In other words, it seems incredibly important that we live our lives in a way that's worthy of the gospel. But what does that mean? How do we live lives worthy of the gospel? Well, thankfully, Paul answers those questions too. He continues in the following verses, the rest of this verse and into the following verse. He says, "Then I will know that you are standing together with one spirit and one purpose, fighting together for the faith, which is the good news. Don't be intimidated in any way by your enemies. This will be a sign to them that they are going to be destroyed, but that you are going to be saved, even by God himself." In this brief passage, Paul describes 4 characteristics that define what it means to be worthy, not only for Christians, but perhaps also for Captain America. First, being worthy requires conviction. Paul tells the Philippian Christians again that being worthy includes, in verse 27, standing strong with one purpose. Paul often urged his fellow Christians to stand strong or stand firm in the faith. In other words, don't back down, don't quit, don't give up. And Captain America models this sort of conviction all throughout Avengers Endgame. Even after their devastating loss to Thanos, Steve never gives up. Before embarking on their mission to reclaim the Infinity Stones and undo the destruction that Thanos wrought, Captain America reminds his fellow Avengers, he inspires them, saying, 5 years ago we lost, all of us. We lost friends, we lost family, we lost a part of ourselves. Today, we have a chance to take it all back. This is the fight of our lives, and we're going to win, whatever it takes. And those words, whatever it takes, become the Avengers' mantra throughout the movie. During the final battle with Thanos, Captain America demonstrates that conviction. I mean, you saw him beaten and bloodied. Steve refused to stay down. Every time Thanos knocked him to the ground, he just got right back up. Outmatched and overpowered, Cap stood strong no matter what. And that's the kind of conviction that God calls us to demonstrate when it comes to the gospel, the truth about Jesus Christ. Elsewhere, the Apostle Paul writes, this is Ephesians chapter 6, beginning in verse 12, he says, "Our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in heavenly realms. Therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you have done everything, to stand. Stand firm." He says it over and over in the passage, and even as the passage continues, stand firm and stand strong. The devil, demons, and this dark world are going to knock us down and beat us up. Our determination to live lives for Christ is in ways that we've never even imagined. But no matter what trials or temptations, stand strong. Whatever challenges you face, whatever battles you're fighting, God will give you the victory as long as you stand strong in Him, whatever it takes. So first, living lives worthy of the gospel requires us to have conviction. But further, being worthy requires cooperation. As Paul continues, he explains that being worthy means, in verse 27 again, standing together with one spirit and one purpose, fighting together for the faith. Other translations say stand united or work together as one in this verse. God doesn't call us just to believe. He calls us to belong. And that means that we're all a part of a team. We stand together. We fight together. And part of what makes Captain America worthy is his ability to lead, inspire, and work with a team. Toward the beginning of Avengers Endgame, Tony Stark, Iron Man, recalls a conversation that he had with Steve back in Avengers Age of Ultron. During a disagreement, Tony argues a hostile alien army came charging through a hole in space. How were you guys planning on beating that? And Steve answered with just one word: together. And Tony pessimistically replies, "You'll lose." And then Steve says, "We'll do that together too." Steve understood the value of teamwork and unity, being united together. In the climactic final fight, Captain America rallies every single hero from the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe with the beloved and familiar cry, "Avengers, assemble." Assemble means to come together. And that's what we're called to do as followers of Christ. In fact, that's what we're called, period. The Greek word translated church all throughout the Bible is ekklesia. And the most literal, basic definition of that word is simply an assembly. That's what the church is. It's God's people assembled. The Philippian church that Paul's writing to here, it was a hodgepodge of believers from a variety of backgrounds, some Jewish, some Greek, some pagan. They had different personalities and different, sometimes conflicting opinions, and yet they found a way to work together. They recognized that there is strength in numbers, and because they did, people were saved, lives were changed. And when we do the same thing, we'll experience the same results. Whether you want to feed the hungry or, orphans, or provide school supplies or Christmas presents for underprivileged children, or just share the gospel, none of us can do alone what all of us can do together. We can accomplish more and have greater impact on our community and on our country when we work together. Worthy of the gospel of Jesus, then we need to cooperate with one another, stand united, and work together as one. And furthermore, Paul tells us that living lives worthy of the gospel requires contending. Contending. Again, Paul says that being worthy means, in verse 27, fighting together for the faith. Another translation puts it this way: striving side by side as if in combat for the faith of the gospel. We have to fight, to contend for the faith. Before becoming the super soldier Captain America, Steve Rogers was just a skinny kid from Brooklyn. During World War II, Steve tried again and again to enlist in the Army, but he was always rejected because of his long list of health issues. He was just too sickly to serve. And after yet another failed attempt to enlist, his buddy Bucky Barnes confronts him and says, "Why are you so keen to fight?" And Steve answers, "Bucky, come on. There are men laying down their lives. I've got no right to do any less than them." Steve was eager to fight, both before and after becoming Captain America, because he knew what he was fighting for, and he knew what he was fighting against. So what are we fighting for? Well, again, just like Paul, Jude writes in Jude 3, "I felt compelled to write and urge you to contend for the faith that was once for all entrusted to God's holy people." Over and over throughout Scripture, we're told to fight for the faith, contend for the faith. It's about our faith. What does it mean to fight for the faith, though? As we already read in Ephesians 6, our battle is not against flesh and blood. Rather, the Christian life is a never-ending struggle against evil, both within ourselves and in the world. We don't fight an earthly enemy, but a spiritual battle against sin and Satan. Paul actually describes our battle in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, where he says, "We are human, but we don't wage war as humans do. We use God's mighty weapons, not worldly weapons, to knock down the strongholds of human reasoning and to destroy false arguments. We destroy every proud obstacle that keeps people from knowing God. We capture their rebellious thoughts and teach them to obey Christ." We're called to defend our faith with reason and truth and arguments. We stand opposed to false religions and worldviews that are hostile toward God. And we do this by spreading the gospel, the good news about Jesus Christ. God is counting on us, he says, to take captives, which means surrendering our own thoughts and beliefs to Christ, but also leading other people to do the same. And in order to do that, we have to engage. We have to get out there. We have to fight. We have to share the gospel. Our goal is not to destroy our enemies, but rather to make them our allies, to convert them to Christ. The gospel, the truth about Jesus Christ, is the power of God to save everyone who believes. So according to worthy requires conviction, cooperation, contending, and finally, it takes courage. As Paul continues, he urges the Philippian Christians to fight the good fight, again in verse 28, without being frightened in any way by those who oppose you. Another translation puts it this way: don't be intimidated in any way by your enemies. Courage is essential to living lives worthy of the gospel. Courage is also one of Captain America's strengths. I'm reminded of a scene again from Captain America, the First Avenger, that takes place before Steve Rogers received the super soldier serum that transformed him into Captain America. Despite Steve's physical frailties, Dr. Abraham Erskine sees something of value in him and enrolls him in this special project called Project Rebirth. But the man in charge, Colonel Chester Phillips, is unimpressed. And I want to play just another brief clip for you from this scene so you can see Captain America's courage. That's guts, right? In the comics, Captain America number 444 to be specific. Another one of the mythical members of the Avengers, Hercules, tells Captain America that on Mount Olympus, we measure wisdom by Athena, we measure speed by Hermes, we measure power by Zeus, but we measure courage by Captain America. The thing is, though, courage isn't just for superheroes or soldiers. You know, we tend to equate courage with heroism, firefighters running into a burning building, police taking down an armed criminal, or even early Christians, facing violent persecution. We think of courage as something extraordinary, something unusual, or something that people are called upon to exhibit only in life-threatening, dangerous situations. But most of the time, we don't think we need it. We just don't see courage as an everyday necessity, but that's a mistake. Courage is not just for extreme situations. In fact, courage is basic to exercising every other virtue. Courage is required by God's people every day. It takes courage to do the right thing in a difficult situation. It takes courage to own up to your mistakes and to confess your faults. It takes courage to give generously in a floundering economy or to ask for help when you need it. It takes courage to stand up and stand strong for Christ. Courage is foundational to every other virtue, so much so that it's really impossible to mature in Christ without it. It's impossible to consistently live lives worthy of the gospel as long as we're dominated by fear rather than courage. Without courage, all of our other virtues will be weak and easily compromised. They'll fade away at the slightest challenge. When Joshua took over as leader of the Israelites, God told him in Joshua chapter 1, verse 9, "This is my command. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged." God actually repeats this exact command, be strong and courageous, 14 times to different people in different situations all throughout the Bible. And God's command to them is his command to you. Be strong and courageous. So what does it mean to be worthy, to live lives worthy of the gospel? Well, being worthy, first of all, requires conviction, standing strong with one purpose. It requires cooperation, working together as one. It requires contending, fighting the good fight of faith. And it requires courage without being frightened in any way. And Captain America has long been my favorite Avenger. In fact, I'm wearing my Captain America shoes. Have you guys seen those? Captain America high tops. But he's my favorite Avenger because he embodies these Christian virtues. And it was these characteristics, this conviction and cooperation, contending and courage, that made Captain America worthy of wielding Thor's magical, mythical hammer, Mjolnir. And it's these same characteristics that are what make our lives worthy of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Next week, we'll wrap up this series by looking at two more characters and story arcs from Avengers Endgame and see what else we can learn about life, faith, and God. In the meantime, though, if you've been struggling to live a life worthy of the gospel, I want to encourage you to go to God in prayer. Ask him to strengthen your conviction and your courage and to embolden you to contend for the faith in cooperation with your fellow believers. And if you need someone to pray with you and next to you, then come talk with me. You can pull me aside after church, you can call me at home, or you can just come forward now while we stand and sing together. Let's sing, church.